He struck her at the ball, never knowing her husband the Duke stood watching from the doorway. The crack of his palm against her cheek silenced the entire ballroom before the musicians even realized they should stop playing. 200 candles. 200 witnesses. And not one of them knew that the quiet young woman in the plain grey gown, the one everyone had spent the season looking straight through, was already a duchess. Her husband was standing in the shadow of the doorway when it happened, and he had seen everything. He always came in through the side entrance at these affairs, because he could not abide the receiving line, the bowing, the mothers steering their daughters into his path like ships tacking toward a harbour. He would slip in through the servants' passage instead, pause in the dark beside the ballroom door, and do the one small selfish thing he permitted himself at every ball he was forced to attend. He would find her first. Before anyone announced him, before a single soul in that glittering room knew the Duke of Rothmere had arrived, he would stand in the shadows and simply look for his wife. It had become a habit he did not examine too closely. Find the small figure with the chestnut hair, half hidden near the refreshment tables or the window seats, the young woman nobody troubled to notice. Watch her for one private moment before he had to become, again, the Duke that all of London feared. It was the only piece of the evening that ever felt like his own. He had found her that night exactly where he expected. Near the tall windows, a glass of ratafia untouched in her hand, waiting out the evening the way she always did, patient as still water. A man was speaking to her. The Duke recognized him at once and felt something in his chest go cold and quiet, the particular quiet that comes just before a storm breaks. Sir Edmund Thorne. Leaning close. His voice rising in that particular register men use when they want an audience to notice their cruelty without appearing, to the audience, to be cruel at all. The Duke could not hear the words. He would spend the rest of his life grateful he could not hear them, because if he had, he was not certain he could have made himself wait even the few seconds it took to cross that room. He saw his wife's spine straighten instead. He saw her say something back to Sir Edmund. Brief, level, entirely without fear, and he saw Sir Edmund's face go white and then red, the particular sequence of a small man discovering he has been answered by someone he believed could not answer back. And then Sir Edmund Thorne raised his hand and struck her across the face in front of the whole of society. The music died mid-phrase. A gasp went up from 100 throats at once, and beneath the gasp, that terrible eager hush of a crowd that has just tasted scandal and leaned forward, hungry for more. She did not cry out. That was the detail the Duke would carry with him to his grave, not the blow itself, though the sight of it would visit him in dreams for years, but the way she received it. She did not stagger. She did not weep. She lifted one gloved hand slowly to the mark blooming red on her cheek, and then she lifted her chin, and she looked Sir Edmund Thorne directly in the eye with a composure so total it silenced the room more completely than any scream could have done. "You have not changed at all," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of that ballroom. "I once believed your cruelty was the worst thing about you, Sir Edmund. I understand now it was only ever the most honest." Sir Edmund's hand rose a second time. It never fell. Because by then the Duke of Rothmere was already crossing the floor, and he would never afterward be able to say how he had covered that distance, whether he had walked or run or simply arrived, the way a thunderclap arrives after the lightning has already split the sky. There was the sound of the slap, and the white heat that rose in him like a tide he had spent 17 years learning to master, and then his hand had closed around Sir Edmund Thorne's wrist like an iron manacle, and the whole room was staring, and the orchestra had gone entirely silent. "If you raise your hand to my wife again," the Duke said, in the low, even voice that had made grown men apologize before they understood what they were apologizing for, "I promise you I will break it. And then I will break the other. And then you and I will discuss, at considerable length and in a much quieter room, precisely what is owed for the mark you have already left upon her face." Nobody in that ballroom would ever agree, afterward, on exactly how long the silence lasted. Some said a heartbeat. Some said an eternity. What every single one of them agreed upon was the word that dropped into that silence and detonated through the room like powder catching flame. Wife. The Duke watched it cross Sir Edmund's face, the word failing to land, and then landing all at once with the weight of a collapsing wall. He watched the colour drain from the man entirely. And he watched 200 of the most fashionable people in England perform, in the space of a single breath, the same swift and merciless arithmetic. The quiet companion in the corner. The poor relation nobody troubled to introduce properly. The young woman half of London had learned, over the better part of a year, to look straight through. She was the Duchess of Rothmere. The coldest, most private, most relentlessly unmarried man in the kingdom had a wife, and none of them had known it, and Sir Edmund Thorne had just struck her across the face in front of every person whose good opinion he had left in the world. Whatever remained of his position in society, it would not survive the hour. And every soul present understood, with the particular clarity scandal always provides, that he had done it entirely to himself. "Your Grace," Sir Edmund stammered, "there is some mistake. She is a companion. A poor relation of the Pembertons. She cannot possibly be." "She is the Duchess of Rothmere," the Duke said, and he did not raise his voice, and every soul in that room heard him regardless. "We were married quietly this spring, at my estate, for reasons that are my own and no one's concern but hers and mine. She has continued to live as Miss Marlowe in her cousin's household because she chose to remain a little longer, to see to certain affairs of the heart that mattered more to her than any title I could offer, and because she is precisely the sort of woman who thinks first of others and last of her own comfort. A quality, Sir Edmund, that I do not believe you would recognize even were it explained to you with diagrams." His grip did not loosen. "You knew her once," the Duke went on. "You were engaged to her 5 years past, before her father's death revealed the family fortune to be considerably smaller than the world had believed. And when that fortune failed, you threw her over within the week, publicly, cruelly, for an heiress with £40,000 and a father in trade. And you allowed all of London to believe the fault lay with her? I know the whole of it, Sir Edmund. I know it because she told me. Not as a grievance. She does not complain. She told me because I asked, and because she does not lie." He leaned in, just slightly, and his voice dropped lower still. "I confess I have waited some while for the pleasure of this particular moment. I had thought you would content yourself with insult. Instead, before the whole of society, you have struck her, and handed me leave to do to your reputation precisely what you did to hers 5 years ago. Only I have no need of a lie to work with. I have the truth. And the truth, Sir Edmund, does a very great deal more lasting damage." His wife had come to stand beside him by then. He felt her there before he turned his head, the way he always felt her there, and she said quietly, for his ear alone, "Rothmere, do not break his hand. He is not worth what it would cost you." And then, softer still, "Though I confess, God forgive me, I am glad that you wish to." The Duke released Sir Edmund's wrist. The man staggered backward, cradling it though it was unmarked, his face the colour of ash. The Duke turned his back on him, the cut direct, the cruelest gesture one gentleman can offer another, delivered by a duke in front of 200 witnesses, and gave his arm to his wife, and looked at last, fully, at the mark reddening on her cheek. "Come," he said, and all the deadliness had gone out of his voice, leaving only tenderness behind. "You have done nothing tonight but bear an unkindness with more grace than this entire room deserves to witness, and I find I have no wish to share you with any of them one moment longer. Come home, Cecilia. Let me see to your face. And let all of London spend tonight discovering exactly what they missed." He led her from the ballroom through a crowd that parted, and whispered, and stared, and he did not hurry, and he did not look at a single one of them. And he thought, walking out into the cold London night with his wife's hand tucked into his arm, that he had never in his life been so furious, or so proud, or so entirely, dangerously, irrevocably in love. None of it would have happened at all if he had not, 1 year earlier, very nearly walked past a lit candle in an empty library. He had been a guest that autumn at Marlow Grange, the country seat of a family called Pemberton. Old Mr. Pemberton held mortgages the Duke wished to purchase, quietly, in order to relieve certain tenants the man had been squeezing without mercy, and the visit was purely business, the sort of interminable country house week the Duke endured only because his conscience required it of him. Miss Cecilia Marlowe had been there the entire time, and the Duke of Rothmere, who prided himself on missing nothing, had missed her completely. She was a cousin of Mrs. Pemberton's, taken in after her father's death left her with neither fortune nor protector, and she had made herself, in the particular way such women learn to, almost entirely invisible. She fetched shawls. She read aloud when Mrs. Pemberton's eyes tired. She minded the Pembertons' neglected younger daughter, a shy, plain girl of 14 named Henrietta, whom her own mother could barely be troubled to notice, and she did all of it so quietly, so competently, that a man could stay in that house a full week and never once think to ask her name. He first truly saw her at 2 o'clock in the morning, in the library, when neither of them knew the other was there. He had come down for a book, unable to sleep as he rarely could, and found the fire banked low and a single candle burning and a young woman asleep in the wing chair with a volume fallen open across her lap. He very nearly withdrew without a sound. He would think, later, a great many times, about how close he had come to simply closing that door and going back to bed and never knowing what he would have thrown away. Instead he glanced at the book. It was a translation of Ovid. A difficult passage he himself had struggled over that same week, a copy of which he had left on this very shelf, and tucked inside its pages was a sheet of paper covered in small, neat handwriting. Being a man of very few scruples where his own curiosity was concerned, he read it. It was her own translation. Rendered for no master, for no examination, for no purpose in the world but her own private pleasure, at 2 in the morning, after a full day spent fetching another woman's shawls. And it was good. It was, in places, better than his own reading of the same lines, sharpened by small marginal notes of an originality that stopped him where he stood, because he had spent his entire life surrounded by the most expensively educated men in England and had rarely encountered a mind that moved quite like the one on that page. He put another log on the fire, quietly, so she would not wake cold. He took nothing. He said nothing. And he found, in the weeks that followed, that he could not stop thinking of her. He courted her attention the only way a duke may safely court the attention of a poor companion without setting the entire household talking, by pursuing, with great apparent seriousness, an argument about Ovid. It took him 3 days to persuade her he meant it. She had learned, in 5 hard years, that a great man's sudden interest in a penniless woman meant precisely one thing, and it was never anything honourable, and she had shut herself against it the way a house shutters its windows before a storm. But he was patient, and he was in earnest, and eventually she agreed to argue the translation with him in the cold garden at 11 in the morning, where no one troubled to look. She won the argument. She won it handily, and did not spare him in the winning, and the Duke of Rothmere, who had spent 38 years being flattered, deferred to, and carefully managed by everyone he met, discovered for the first time in longer than he could remember the specific, startling pleasure of being told, plainly, that he was wrong. He went home to Rothmere Hall at the end of that visit with old Pemberton's mortgages in his pocket and Cecilia Marlowe's face fixed immovably in his mind, and he did not manage to dislodge it, no matter how he tried, and eventually he stopped trying. He learned her history slowly, over the months of secret letters that followed, and each fact made him angrier than the last. She had been the only daughter of a gentleman of modest fortune who had, unusually, believed his daughter's mind was worth educating properly. At 19 she had been engaged, respectably, to Sir Edmund Thorne, a match everyone approved. Then her father died, and the modest fortune proved to be mortgaged nearly to the roof, and within the week Sir Edmund had broken the engagement publicly, cruelly, and let it be understood, without ever quite saying so aloud, that some fault of hers was to blame. A whisper is enough to ruin a woman with no father and no money to defend her. It needed no more than that. 5 years she had spent as the Pembertons' poor relation, working for her keep, reminded daily that she was an expense they had been generous enough to tolerate. 5 years of that quick, extraordinary mind spent translating dead poets by stolen candlelight because it was the only pleasure left to her that no one could take away. The Duke of Rothmere resolved, somewhere in the middle of a long night alone with a glass of brandy and her memory, that he would end it. He told himself at first he meant only to settle a small independence on her, quietly, anonymously, enough to free her from the Pembertons' house. He told himself this for several weeks before he was honest enough to admit the truth, which was that he did not want to free Cecilia Marlowe to live her own life somewhere far away from him. He wanted to marry her. He, who had built a reputation on avoiding matchmaking mothers for 20 years. He, who had believed himself constitutionally incapable of the entire business. Making her believe him was the hardest thing he had ever done. When at last he told her plainly, without ornament, what he intended, she laughed, not a cruel laugh, and not a happy one, but the laugh of a woman so thoroughly wounded that a good thing offered can only ever look like a trap. "Your Grace," she said, "I will not pretend I am not hurt to find you playing such a game with me, for I had foolishly begun to think you a man of different character. But I am no fool, whatever 5 years have taught this county to believe of me. Dukes do not marry penniless companions with ruined names. If you want a mistress, you have insulted me by the asking. If you want sport, you have chosen a poor subject. I have had considerable practice at being amused over by powerful people, and I no longer find it wounds me quite as it once did. Either way, I would be obliged if you let me go. Mrs. Pemberton will want her shawl." "Cecilia," he said, the first time he had ever used her Christian name, and he saw it startle her. "Look at me. Not at what 5 years have taught you to expect. At what is actually standing in front of you." She looked. He let her look. And he watched her wariness fight the plain evidence of her own eyes. For whatever else she was, Cecilia Marlowe was too honest a thinker to ignore evidence merely because it frightened her. "I see a man who is not laughing," she said slowly. "Who does not look at me the way men look at sport? Who looks," she stopped. "Who looks almost as frightened as I am? Which makes no sense at all, for you are the Duke of Rothmere, and you have nothing in this world left to fear." "I have exactly one thing left to fear," he said, "and I am looking directly at it, and it is going very badly, because it is looking back at me as though I mean it harm, when the truth is I have never in my life meant anyone less harm, or more good. I have spent 17 years perfectly certain I would never want this. And then I read a stranger's translation of Ovid at 2 in the morning and argued philosophy with her in a cold garden, and discovered that my certainty was only ever the certainty of a man who had not yet met the person who would undo it. I am asking you to marry me, Cecilia. Not for a season. Not as any sort of arrangement. For the whole of both our lives. I know you have no cause on earth to believe a word of it. I am asking you to believe it regardless, or at least to allow me the time it takes to prove it. It took him the whole of that winter to prove it. He wrote to her, not love letters, or not only love letters, but pages and pages of argument, philosophy, books discussed and disputed, and it was the letters, more than any declaration, that finally persuaded her. A man may lie in a proposal, she told him once, long after. A man may even manage to lie convincingly in a love letter if he is sufficiently practiced. But no man writes 12 pages disputing a fine point of natural philosophy with a woman he intends only to seduce or to mock. The letters could not be counterfeited. They were the proof that could not lie. They married quietly that spring, at Rothmere Hall, and the quietness had been entirely her idea before it was his. If you marry me before the whole of England, she told him, laying the matter out with the same precision she brought to everything, the story becomes at once the tale of the Duke's great folly, the man who threw himself away on a ruined nobody. It will be told and retold, and I shall spend my whole life as a curiosity, the companion who trapped a duke. Every kindness you show me will be read as proof of my cunning, and every fault of mine magnified into evidence you were deceived. Whereas if we marry quietly, and I remain a little longer as I am, then when the truth does come out, as truth always does, it comes out on our terms, at a time of our choosing, in a shape we control ourselves. Let them discover all at once that the nobody they looked through all along was a duchess the entire time. There is a great deal of power, Rothmere, in being underestimated. 5 years have taught me that particular lesson very well. Let us put it to use. There was one other condition, and it was not negotiable, and it had nothing at all to do with strategy. I cannot simply vanish and leave Henrietta, she told him. She is 14, and plain, and shy, and her own mother despises her for the whole of it, and I am the only creature in that house who has ever once told the child she is worth anything at all. If I disappear overnight into a duchess's life, she will believe I abandoned her the moment something finer came along, that I was only ever biding my time, exactly like everyone else who has ever passed through her life. It will confirm the worst thing she already believes about herself, which is that no one stays. I will not do that to her. Let me remain a few months more, and prepare her, and arrange matters so that when the truth comes out, she comes to me, for I mean to take her, Rothmere. I mean for us to take that neglected child into our own house, if you will have her, and give her the raising she has been so cruelly denied. That is my only condition. It is not a condition, the Duke said. It is the finest thing I have ever heard anyone say, and it is the very reason I am marrying you. Bring her. Rothmere Hall is far too large and far too empty, and I have wanted, for years, to fill it with something that mattered. The secret months that followed were, the Duke would say later, the strangest of his life, and the hardest, though he would not have traded a single one of them. He was a married man whose wife lived 30 miles distant in another family's house, fetching another woman's shawls, addressed still as Miss Marlowe, treated still as an expense. Every possessive instinct in him rebelled against it. But she had asked it of him for Henrietta's sake, and for the sake of a plan she had thought through with far more care than he had thought through anything in his life, and he had already learned that his wife's judgment ran truer than his own temper. They met where they could, in a ruined chapel on the edge of the Pemberton land, twice a month, under the pretense of gathering simples for the still room or inspecting a distant tenant farm. He remembered those stolen hours for the rest of his life, the way her whole bearing changed the moment she stepped clear of the trees, the careful smallness she wore like armor at Marlow Grange falling away all at once, so that by the time she reached him she was entirely herself again. Quick, and upright, and unafraid. I do not know how you bear it, he said to her once, holding her before she had to go. To be yourself with me for 1 hour, and then walk back into that house and be nobody again. It would drive me half mad. It is driving me half mad, and I only have to watch it. I bear it, she said, because it is nearly finished, and because I have borne far worse for no reason at all, for 5 long years. It was harder to be nobody before I knew you, Rothmere. Before, the smallness was the whole of my life, there was nothing else beneath it. Now it is only a costume I wear a little while longer, and underneath it I am the Duchess of Rothmere, and I am loved, and I have a ruined chapel in the woods where I am myself twice a month, and it is all very nearly over. You gave me that, before you ever gave me a name or a house. You gave me back myself, in a cold garden, arguing over a dead poet. And once a person has truly been seen, being unseen again can never quite kill them the way it once could, because they carry the seeing with them, wherever they go. It was in those last weeks that Sir Edmund Thorne reappeared, hunting the county's country houses for a second wife now that his fortunes had begun their long decline, and found to his considerable satisfaction the woman he had jilted still installed at Marlow Grange as a poor companion, still, as far as he knew, entirely beneath his notice. He could not resist her. The Duke came to understand, piecing the story together afterward, that a certain kind of man cannot leave alone the person he has wronged, because their continued smallness is the only proof he has that the wronging was deserved, and any spark of spirit in them becomes an unbearable reproach that must be crushed all over again. He baited her. He reminded her, before others, of her fallen state. And she bore it with a composure the Duke's fury nearly could not withstand when she told him of it, a composure he learned, in time, was not meekness at all but the patience of a woman who already knew exactly how the story would end, and had only to wait. Do not go to him in anger, she told the Duke, when he wished to ride to Marlow Grange that very night and settle the matter privately. If you take me out now, in a fury over Sir Edmund, then he becomes the reason for everything. And I will not grant him even that much importance. Let him go on tormenting the nobody he believes me to be. Let him do it in public, before witnesses, at some grand occasion, and then let the truth fall on him all at once, at the very worst moment for him and the very best for us. He is building his own scaffold, one small cruelty at a time. Do not interrupt him. Let him finish the work himself. You are planning the entire thing, the Duke said, something close to awe in his voice. You are laying a trap for the man, and using yourself as the bait, and you are entirely calm about it. I have had 5 years to plan precisely what I would do to Sir Edmund Thorne, should the power ever come into my hands, she said. I lacked only the power. Now, thanks to you, I have that as well. So yes, Rothmere, I am planning it, and when it comes, I expect it will come at a ball, for that is where such men do their cruelest work. You must be ready to cross the room the moment I need you, and say the true things in that dreadful quiet voice of yours, and not one moment before. Can you wait for my signal, and not spend your anger too soon? I will wait, the Duke said, though it costs me every ounce of restraint I possess. You are the most formidable creature I have ever encountered, Cecilia, and I include myself in that reckoning. And I thank Providence I am on your side of this particular war, for I should not at all care to be on the other. He waited. And on a night in early summer, at a ball given by Lady Casford, Sir Edmund Thorne, secure in his contempt, certain the quiet companion in the corner could offer him no defence at all, raised his hand to strike her. The trap she had built so patiently, over so many months, closed exactly as she had designed it to close. In the carriage going home through the dark London streets, the Duke held his wife's hand and looked again at the mark still visible on her cheek, and found the fury he had mastered in the ballroom wanted very badly to return. I ought to have broken his hand, he said. You told me not to, and I obeyed, because you asked it of me. But I want you to know that every mile of this drive home, I am regretting my own obedience. I know, she said, and did not let go of his hand. And I love you for the part of you that wanted to. But I am glad you did not, and I will tell you why, and it is not softness, you know very well I have none to spare for Sir Edmund Thorne. A broken hand heals. It is forgotten within the season, and it would have made him, in the eyes of the world, the victim, the man the brutal Duke of Rothmere assaulted at a ball. What you did instead will never heal, and will never be forgotten. You gave him the cut direct before the whole of society, and you told that entire room, in your terrible quiet voice, exactly what he did to me 5 years ago, the truth, which he has spent 5 years burying beneath a lie of his own making. You did not injure his hand tonight. You injured his name, which is the only thing the man has ever truly cared for. And you did it with nothing but the truth, which means it can never be answered, or undone, or revenged. By morning there will not be a single drawing room in London that will receive him. You have finished him completely, Rothmere, and permanently, without breaking a single bone. It is a far more terrible thing than violence could ever be, and it is exactly what he has earned. He tended the mark on her face himself that night, kneeling by the fire in his own dressing room, refusing to let any maid near her, bathing her cheek with a gentleness that would have astonished every soul in that ballroom had they seen the fearsome Duke of Rothmere on his knees before his wife. What is it? He asked, when he noticed her watching him with an expression he could not quite read. You are looking at me strangely. I am thinking, she said, that no one has taken care of me since my father died. 5 years, and not once. When I was ill, I nursed myself. When I was tired, no one noticed. I had trained myself to forget what it felt like to be looked after, because the wanting of it was too painful when there was no chance of ever having it. And now here is the Duke of Rothmere on his knees, bathing my face, and I find I do not entirely know how to bear it. I could bear the cruelty, Rothmere. I grew very skilled at bearing cruelty. It is the kindness I have no defence against at all. Then let it undo you, he said, setting down the cloth and taking her face carefully between his hands. You spent 5 years armoured, and that armour kept you alive, and I will never ask you to lower it toward anyone who might still hurt you. But you may lower it toward me. That is the whole of what marriage is meant to be, though God knows I did not understand it myself until I met you. It is the one place in all the world where you need no armour at all, where being hurt is never a nuisance, and being tired is always noticed, and being ill means someone sits up with you through the night. You are safe in this house. You will always be safe in this house. You may come apart in my arms as often as you please, for the rest of both our lives, and I will be here every single time to gather up the pieces. It is not a burden to me, Cecilia. It is the entire point. and Cecilia Marlowe, Duchess of Rothmere, who had not wept when Sir Edmund Thorne struck her across the face before the whole of society, wept then at last, not the tears of the ballroom, which she had refused to give him, but 5 long years of them, all at once, against her husband's shoulder, while he held her and did not once tell her to stop. By the next morning London had turned entirely over, in the swift, shameless way London always does. Cards arrived by the dozen from every fashionable house that had spent the previous evening whispering about the nobody in the corner, congratulations, warm remembrances, ladies who had cut her at the Pembertons 3 seasons past now professing they had always sensed something distinguished about dear Miss Marlowe. Mrs. Pemberton herself wrote, expressing her very great joy at her dear cousin's happy elevation, and her certainty that Cecilia would not forget the family who had sheltered her in her difficulties. I fetched that woman's shawls for 5 years, Cecilia said, reading the letter aloud over breakfast with the mark still faintly visible on her cheek, and she called me an expense to my face not 1 month past. What shall we do about the Pembertons, Rothmere? Whatever you wish, he said. I hold paper on old Pemberton I purchased last year to relieve his tenants. If you wished it, I could make his position exceedingly uncomfortable. I will not press you either way. I only want you to know the choice is entirely yours to make. She considered it seriously, the way she considered everything, and at last shook her head. I do not want to ruin them. I have thought of it a great many nights, over a great many shawls, and I find I have no taste for it after all. For it would make me only a smaller version of Sir Edmund, a person who uses power to punish. And it would punish Henrietta besides, for she must go on living in that house. No, here is what I want, and it is the whole of what I want from the Pembertons. I want Henrietta. I want us to fetch her this week, in such a manner that they cannot refuse and are, in fact, glad to be rid of her, so that she never learns she was fought over, and can believe, cleanly, that she was chosen. That is my revenge on that household. Not to destroy them. To take the one thing in their house they never once valued, and love it, and raise it into everything they were too small ever to see it could become. They went to Marlow Grange within the week, in the great crested carriage, and the Duke would say afterward it was one of the purest pleasures of his life. Not from any cruelty done, for none was done, but from the sheer spectacle of the Pembertons' scramble to please the woman they had worked like a servant for half a decade. Cecilia asked to see Henrietta privately, before any word passed between the adults, for she would not have the girl learn her own fate as a transaction discussed over tea. When she came down again she was leading by the hand a thin, frightened girl whose face had already begun to transform with the particular disbelief of a person who has just been told, for the first time in their life, that they are wanted. Henrietta, she said, this is my husband, the Duke of Rothmere. Rothmere, this is the bravest girl I know, and she has agreed to come and live with us, and be our own. If her mother and father will permit it, which I am quite certain they will, for they are so very attentive to her happiness. The Pembertons permitted it at once, concealing their relief beneath a great show of maternal sacrifice, and the Duke of Rothmere, watching Henrietta's face turn slowly across that visit from disbelief to hope to a fragile, dawning joy, understood that his wife had just performed the truest act of revenge he had ever witnessed. And that it did not resemble revenge at all, because it was made entirely of love. Henrietta came to Rothmere Hall that summer, and the great house that had stood half-shuttered for years began, for the second time in a 12-month, to fill with life. She was, at first, unbearably grateful. The gratitude of a creature so unused to kindness that she flinched from it, certain always that the catch would come, the withdrawal, the moment she would be told it had all been some mistake and she must go back. She thanked the servants for everything. She apologized for taking up space. She kept to her room unless summoned. The Duke set himself, patiently, to teaching her the terror was unnecessary, and discovered, to his own considerable surprise, that he was rather good at it. He found she had a mind, a slower mind than Cecilia's, less dazzling, but genuine and curious and starved half to death, and he began, quietly, to teach a frightened girl of 14 the things no one had ever thought her worth teaching. He started with the stars, because they required nothing of her but wonder, and he took her out to the old observatory on clear nights and showed her the planets through his grandfather's great telescope, and watched the fear go out of her face a little more with every visit. "You are courting that child," Cecilia told him one such night, watching from the observatory door. "Exactly as you once courted me, with her mind. You found the one thing no one ever valued in her, and you are watching her come alive beneath it. I did not know, when I married you, that you had it in you to be a father." "Neither did I," the Duke admitted. "I had assumed, if I thought of it at all, that I would be like my own father, correct, and distant, and disappointed. Instead I find I would burn down London for that child, Cecilia. I have known her 2 months. She apologizes for existing, and flinches when I raise my voice, and I find the flinching makes me want to weep, and the small victories, the night she laughed aloud, the morning she asked for a second helping without an apology first, make me happier than any triumph of my whole life before you. No one ever told me this was in the world to be had. Henrietta blossomed at Rothmere the way a plant blossoms that has finally been set in the sun. Slowly at first, and then all at once, into a shape no one who had known her in the dark of that other house would have predicted. The apologizing left her. The flinching left her. She grew, over that first year, into a young woman of genuine confidence and a dry, quick wit that could make even the fearsome Duke of Rothmere laugh aloud at his own dinner table. In the second season of their marriage, the Duke gave a ball. He had not given one in 15 years. Rothmere House in London had stood half-shut for a decade and a half, its owner a byword for cold reclusiveness, and so when the cards went out announcing a ball in honor of the Duchess, all of society understood something unprecedented was occurring, and not one soul among the invited would have missed it for the world. Cecilia came down the great staircase of Rothmere House that night on her husband's arm, wearing the family diamonds and a gown that had cost a small fortune, and the Duke, watching the assembled room watch her, thought he had never in his life seen anything to equal the sight. She was not made beautiful by the occasion, that was the thing he understood, watching. She remained, in the plain accounting of features, exactly what she had always been. But no one looked through her that night. What the room was watching was not beauty. It was authority. He presented her formally, name by name, and there was a message in the formality that every guest received without needing it explained. This is the Duchess of Rothmere. You will treat her as such. There was one moment the Duke never forgot. Late in the evening, a faded, anxious woman hovered at the edge of the great room, plainly certain she did not belong. The wife of a scholar whose work Cecilia had long admired, a man invited at her particular request, terrified and entirely out of his depth. Cecilia abandoned 3 countesses mid-sentence to cross the whole width of the glittering room and take the woman's hands in her own with a warmth she had shown no duchess all evening. "You left Lady Fenwick standing," the Duke murmured to her later, mid-sentence, to comfort a frightened scholar's wife. "Lady Fenwick has been received in every drawing-room in England her entire life," Cecilia said serenely, "and will survive being left mid-sentence for once." That woman had been received in none of them, and was standing at the edge of the finest room in London, certain she did not belong, exactly as I once stood at the edge of a ballroom not so very different from this one. I could no more have walked past her, Rothmere, than I could walk past a drowning woman. You have given me all this power tonight, the staircase, the diamonds, this whole room bowing. What is the good of any of it if I spend it only on people who already have everything? I would rather spend it on the one still standing in the corner. I know the corner. I lived in it 5 years. And I made myself a promise there, that if I ever climbed out of it, I would spend the rest of my life reaching back in.
Preguntó cuánto iba a costarle. Mateo le explicó que el programa era financiado por la comunidad. Ella le agradeció y colgó. 20 minutos después volvió a llamar y le preguntó si de verdad había hecho todo eso por ella. Mateo dijo que sí. Ella preguntó por qué. Mateo miró la foto de Consuelo sobre su escritorio y respondió, porque alguien tenía que hacerlo. Durante las semanas siguientes, sus vidas se fueron entrelazando de maneras que ninguno de los dos esperaba. Mateo la ayudó a llegar al centro juvenil. Fue con ella a una reunión escolar cuando a Antonia le dio demasiado miedo ir sola. Descubrió que el colegio tenía un pequeño programa de becas de arte del que ella nunca había oído hablar, porque había dejado de asistir a orientación y evitaba la oficina de convivencia escolar. Tomás empezó a dejarle dibujos bajo el limpiaparabrisas cada vez que la veía. Emilia insistía en que Antonia fuera los sábados a ayudarla a pintar. Antonia trataba de mantener distancia porque le aterraba convertirse en una carga, pero Mateo le repetía una y otra vez que la amistad no era una deuda. Poco a poco, Antonia volvió a reír. Empezó a dibujar retratos. Y un día le mostró a Mateo un boceto de Emilia sentada en la mesa del café. Mateo se quedó mirándolo largo rato. Antonia había capturado algo que él nunca había notado, la forma en que Emilia se mordía el labio inferior cada vez que se concentraba. Mateo sonrió y le dijo que era hermoso. Ella se encogió de hombros y dijo que no era tan bueno. Mateo respondió, no tienes que ser buena en algo para que valga la pena. Esas palabras se le quedaron grabadas. Pero no todo se volvió más fácil. La prótesis de Antonia empezó a causarle dolores fuertes porque su cuerpo había cambiado y el ajuste ya no le calzaba. En la clínica le dijeron que necesitaba una nueva, pero el costo estaba muy por encima de lo que podía pagar. Antonia decidió que simplemente dejaría de usarla. Mateo notó que algo andaba mal y le preguntó. Ella admitió que cada paso le dolía. Mateo se frustró, no con ella, sino con la injusticia de la situación. Empezó a investigar fundaciones, subsidios estatales y programas de ayuda para prótesis. Llenaba formularios después de que los niños se dormían. Algunas solicitudes fueron rechazadas, otras nunca respondieron. Una fundación ofreció financiamiento parcial, pero pedía documentos que Antonia no podía conseguir porque sus papeles legales seguían registrados en el domicilio de su tía. Por cada puerta que se abría, dos parecían cerrarse. Antonia empezó a decirle a Mateo que estaba bien, que podía arreglársela sola. Finalmente él la miró y le dijo, sigues diciendo que puedes sola cuando en realidad tienes miedo de que nadie se quede si necesitas demasiado. A Antonia se le llenaron los ojos de lágrimas. Admitió que la gente siempre se iba. Su madre murió. Su padre ya no estaba desde antes. Su tía finalmente no pudo quedarse con ella. Sus amigas dejaron de invitarla porque caminar lento era incómodo. Los chicos que le gustaban la trataban como una tragedia, no como una persona. Había aprendido que conocer a alguien significaba, tarde o temprano, perderlo. Mateo se quedó callado antes de responder. Le dijo que la entendía más de lo que ella imaginaba. Después de la muerte de Consuelo, había creído que si él podía hacerlo todo solo, sus hijos nunca tendrían que vivir otra pérdida. Pero intentar protegerlos del dolor casi lo había convertido en un extraño dentro de su propia casa. Le dijo que la fortaleza no era negarse a recibir ayuda. A veces la fortaleza era confiar lo suficiente en alguien como para aceptarla. Antonia se secó las lágrimas y dijo que ojalá pudiera creer eso. Mateo le respondió que no tenía que creerlo todo de una vez. Podía tomar prestada su fe hasta encontrar la propia. Esa frase se quedó con ella para siempre. Mientras tanto, los hijos de Mateo habían empezado a querer a Antonia de esa forma simple y sin complicaciones que solo tienen los niños. Tomás le pedía ayuda con sus tareas de arte. Emilia empezó a llamarla tía Antonia, lo que a ella le daba vergüenza y a Mateo le sacaba una carcajada. Una tarde, mientras Antonia ayudaba a Emilia a pintar estrellas en una caja de cartón, la niña le preguntó si algún día tendría sus dos piernas de vuelta. Antonia le explicó con calma que no. Emilia lo pensó un momento y dijo, entonces vas a tener que hacer que la que tienes sea realmente increíble. Antonia se rió tan fuerte que se manchó la mejilla con pintura morada sin querer. Mateo la observaba desde la puerta, y por un instante su departamento se sintió más cálido de lo que había estado en años. Pero justo cuando todo parecía mejorar, Antonia recibió una carta del colegio avisándole que corría riesgo de perder su cupo por exceso de inasistencias. La carta no era cruel, pero ella la leyó como una sentencia. Había estado trabajando medio tiempo lavando platos en un restaurante para ahorrar para el transporte, yendo a rehabilitación, e intentando mantener sus notas mientras vivía en una vivienda temporal. Sentía que estaba fallando en todo al mismo tiempo. Esa noche desapareció. Mateo notó que no respondía a sus mensajes. Llamó al centro juvenil y le dijeron que no había vuelto. El pánico le apretó el pecho. Recordó el primer día, cuando la vio parada en la puerta del café, empapada, tratando de no llorar. Manejó por todos los lugares que ella había mencionado, la biblioteca, el terminal de buses, el paseo costero, y finalmente el café donde se habían conocido. La encontró sentada bajo el toldo, mirando fijamente la silla vacía donde se había sentado la primera vez. Mateo se sentó a su lado sin preguntar nada. Durante varios minutos, ninguno habló. Después Antonia dijo: «Creo que todos estarían mejor si dejara de necesitar a la gente». La voz de Mateo se puso firme. Le dijo que estaba equivocada. Ella respondió que estaba cansada de ser la chica a la que siempre hay que ayudar. Mateo contestó que todos necesitaban ayuda alguna vez, incluido él. Ella le dijo que él tenía hijos y responsabilidades y que no debería tener que preocuparse por ella también. Mateo la miró y le dijo: «¿Crees que mis hijos necesitan que les enseñe a sobrevivir solos? No. Necesitan que les enseñe a cuidar a otros incluso cuando cuidar es incómodo». Antonia empezó a llorar. Mateo siguió, diciéndole que el mundo ya le había quitado demasiado, y que él no iba a dejar que le quitara el resto. Le prometió que no podía arreglarlo todo, pero sí podía sentarse a su lado mientras averiguaban el siguiente paso. Esa noche, Antonia volvió al centro juvenil. Mateo habló con la orientadora del colegio y juntos armaron un plan de asistencia especial. El centro comunitario la conectó con una fundación de prótesis y después de semanas de trámites, le aprobaron una nueva pierna. Cuando llegó, Antonia se puso de pie entre las barras paralelas de la clínica, temblando. Dio un paso, después otro. Dolía, pero de una forma distinta. Mateo estaba cerca, junto a Emilia y Tomás. Emilia aplaudió tan fuerte que la kinesióloga se rió. Tomás gritó: «¡Lo lograste!». Antonia los miró y lloró. No porque hubiera caminado. Lloró porque casi había olvidado lo que se sentía tener gente orgullosa de ella por algo más que sobrevivir. Pasaron los meses, y la vida de Antonia empezó a cambiar de maneras pequeñas, casi invisibles. Volvió al colegio con regularidad. Sus dibujos se expusieron en una muestra de arte comunitario del Cerro. Postuló a una beca de arte y quedó seleccionada. Empezó a hacer voluntariado en un centro de rehabilitación para jóvenes con diferencias físicas, donde descubrió que podía hablarles a adolescentes asustados de una forma que los adultos a veces no lograban. Entendía la vergüenza, la rabia, la soledad, el miedo a ser mirado. Les decía que perder una parte del cuerpo no significaba perder el derecho a imaginar un futuro. Mateo siguió presente en su vida, pero nunca la trató como un proyecto. La trató como familia. Cuando ella triunfaba, él lo celebraba. Cuando fallaba, él se quedaba. Cuando se enojaba, él le daba espacio para estarlo. Cuando necesitaba distancia, se la daba. Y cuando dudaba de sí misma, él le recordaba a la niña que había entrado a ese café cargando una mochila de tela y toda una vida de dolor, pero con el coraje suficiente para pedir una silla. Un año después de conocerse, Mateo llevó a Tomás y Emilia de vuelta al mismo café. Antonia llegó con un vestido azul sencillo, cargando una carpeta con sus dibujos. La habían aceptado en un prestigioso programa de arte en otra ciudad y había venido a contarles la noticia. Emilia saltó a sus brazos. Tomás exigió ver la carta de aceptación. Mateo la abrazó al final. Antonia le entregó la carta y Mateo la leyó despacio. Se le llenaron los ojos de lágrimas. Le dijo que estaba orgulloso de ella. Antonia sonrió y respondió: ¿sabes? Casi no entro a este café ese día. Mateo preguntó por qué. Ella dijo que tenía miedo de que la gente la mirara. Mateo miró hacia la silla vacía junto a él y le dijo que se alegraba de que hubiera preguntado. Antonia se sentó y dijo algo que lo hizo reír y llorar al mismo tiempo. Le contó que cuando preguntó por primera vez ¿puedo sentarme aquí?, en realidad no estaba pidiendo una silla. Estaba preguntando si todavía había un lugar en el mundo para alguien como ella. Mateo la miró largo rato y respondió: siempre lo hubo. Antonia bajó la cabeza y lloró. Había pasado 3 años creyendo que el accidente había dividido su vida en un antes y un después, como si todo lo hermoso perteneciera solo a la niña que había sido. Pero ahora entendía algo distinto. Su vida no había terminado en esa ruta costera de invierno. Había cambiado de forma. La madre que había perdido nunca vería a la mujer en la que se había convertido. Pero Antonia empezó a cargar su recuerdo no solo como una herida, sino como una razón para vivir a fondo. Empezó a pintar una serie de retratos llamadas sillas vacías. Cada cuadro mostraba a personas que se habían sentido no deseadas, olvidadas o dejadas atrás. El primer cuadro era la entrada de un café bajo la lluvia. En él, una joven con muleta y mochila de tela se acercaba a una mesa. Al fondo, un padre sentado con sus 2 hijos, y junto a él, una silla vacía. Antonia pintó esa silla más brillante que todo lo demás. Cuando le preguntaban por qué, explicaba que una silla vacía no siempre es una señal de que nadie te quiere ahí. A veces es la prueba de que alguien te estaba guardando un lugar incluso antes de que llegaras. Años después, Antonia se convirtió en una artista reconocida y en defensora de los derechos de los niños con discapacidad. Nunca olvidó ese café. Mateo, con el tiempo, abrió un pequeño taller comunitario donde adolescentes podían aprender arte, carpintería y oficios prácticos sin ser juzgados por sus circunstancias. Tomás se hizo profesor. Emilia se hizo terapeuta infantil. Y Antonia siguió siendo parte de esa familia, no porque Mateo la hubiera rescatado, sino porque en algún punto del camino, 2 familias rotas se encontraron en silencio y aprendieron que el amor no siempre llega por la sangre. A veces llega en forma de una silla que alguien corre para hacerte espacio en la mesa. A veces suena como un desconocido diciendo, no tienes que pedir permiso para sentarte. Eres bienvenida. Y a veces, la persona que crees estar ayudando es en realidad quien te está ayudando a sanar a ti. Mateo siempre pensó que le había dado a Antonia una segunda oportunidad. Pero Antonia le había devuelto algo que él ni siquiera sabía que había perdido después de la muerte de Consuelo. La certeza de que una familia puede crecer sin reemplazar a los que ya no están. Una tarde, muchos años después de aquel día lluvioso, Mateo estaba sentado en ese mismo café, con el último cuadro de Antonia colgado en la pared. Tomás y Emilia ya eran adultos, pero habían vuelto a cenar en familia. Antonia entró cargando un pequeño marco de madera. Adentro había una fotografía de aquella silla vacía original. La puso sobre la mesa y le dijo a Mateo que tenía algo más para darle. Era una carta escrita a mano por su madre, que Antonia había encontrado entre las cosas que su tía había guardado después del accidente. La carta había sido escrita años atrás, pero nunca llegó a entregarse. Estaba dirigida a Antonia y decía que, sin importar a dónde la llevara la vida, nunca debía confundir necesitar ayuda con ser débil. Antonia la leyó en voz alta, y cuando terminó, Mateo se secó los ojos. Le dijo que había pasado años pensando que su madre no le había dejado nada. Pero ahora entendía que le había dejado una enseñanza. Que había necesitado que alguien más se la recordara ahí. Mateo sonrió y dijo que quizás eso era justamente lo que la gente debía hacer los unos por los otros, sostenernos hasta que podamos volver a ponernos de pie. Antonia miró alrededor del café, las mesas, las ventanas, la lluvia empezando a caer suave afuera, y finalmente la silla junto a Mateo. Se rió entre lágrimas y preguntó, ¿sigue libre este asiento? Mateo negó con la cabeza y respondió, ¿para ti? Nunca va a dejar de estarlo. Y esta vez, Antonia no lloró porque se sintiera no deseada. Lloró porque por fin entendió que nunca lo había estado. Si esta historia te tocó algo por dentro, no te quedes solo mirando y sigas de largo. Dale like a este video, compártelo con alguien que todavía cree que la bondad importa, y suscríbete a este canal para que más historias de coraje, familia, perdón y segundas oportunidades lleguen a quienes más las necesitan. Y antes de terminar, quiero pedirte algo especial. Escribe en los comentarios siempre hay una silla para ti si crees que nadie debería tener que preguntarse si todavía pertenece a algún lugar. Porque esta noche, en algún sitio, puede haber una Antonia parada afuera de una puerta, con miedo de pedir un lugar en la mesa. Y puede haber un Mateo que todavía no sabe que un solo gesto de bondad puede cambiar 2 vidas para siempre. Nunca subestimes lo que pasa cuando le haces espacio a alguien que cree que ya lo olvidaron. Puede que pienses que solo estás corriendo una silla, compartiendo un plato de comida, o diciendo un par de palabras amables, pero para alguien que lleva años sintiéndose invisible, ese instante puede convertirse en la puerta de vuelta a la vida. Y a veces los milagros más grandes no son los que nos devuelven lo que perdimos. Son los que nos enseñan a construir algo hermoso con lo que todavía nos queda.